truth behind the news. Welcome to The New American.
Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to The New American Daily, coming to you from the heart of flyover country in Appleton, Wisconsin, a rather stormy part of flyover country today. So hopefully we won't have any problem with the electricity, but we've been having some storms sweeping through today that would knock your socks off. In spite of that, we have got a really big pile of news to deal with today. No one huge story, but lots and lots of kind of mid-level important stories. And so like any other ADHD challenged individual would do, we were unable to make a decision. And we said, well, we'll just cover them all. So we're going to try to shoehorn a lot of stuff in today's program, hour long. And we're going to start with, of course, the not so surprising endorsement of Donald Trump by Tulsi Gabbard, former prominent Democrat, and in fact, once upon a time, Democratic candidate for president, who is now helping Trump to train for his upcoming debate that will supposedly be happening soon against Kamala Harris. She endorsed Trump, and in exchange, the news broke just before the show that Trump is adding both her and RFK Jr. to his transition team in the greater interest of restoring the country and so forth and so on. So we deem this to be the biggest story, but there are a lot of others as well. Mark Zuckerberg has now admitted in a letter to Congressman Jordan that, yes, indeed, Meta Corporation, a.k.a. Facebook, did censor American citizens regarding COVID, regarding the Hunter Biden laptop. He deeply regrets it. We're going to be talking about that. Also, Jack Smith, a.k.a. the zombie prosecutor, is back yet again trying to revive the case that we thought was dead down in Florida, the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. And we have other stuff besides that we'll be covering. I don't want to draw the introduction out too long. But before we get into our first story, let me just remind you that we rely crucially on your support, your viewership. Join us on Rumble. If you've not done so already, be sure to join us, to like our show, to follow us. Very important, all of this. If you're on some other medium, YouTube or X or whatever, feel free to join us on Rumble, or if you prefer, give us a like or the equivalent thereof in the medium of your choice. Either way, we appreciate your viewership and your patronage. Moreover, we have a locals group. This is a wonderful innovation in the internet designed to help people like us create a vibrant online community, and you can catch us at thenewamerican.locals.com. There it is, the information, and we have frequently put additional material there. We also live stream this show on Locals, so if you prefer to be on Locals, you can be there as well. And we also do other live streams. We update with other materials. In fine, we try to do things to stay in contact with you, our viewership, our cherished audience. And finally, there's this. This is our namesake. We are technically speaking an appendage of the New American Magazine, of which we have a couple sample issues beside me here on the table. The New American Magazine has a very, very worthy pedigree. It's been in print for better part of 40 years. It goes back literally decades. Before anyone knew what red pilling was, we were the premier source for red pilling the news. And here we say that we bring you the truth behind the news, which is sort of another way of saying that we red pill you. Finally, let me just say, if you can contribute, send us a tip or whatever be your preference. We are an independent news media, which means we don't have lots of money. We don't have wealthy elite billionaires from the World Economic Forum pouring money into our coffers and enabling us to essentially spend whatever we want to maximize your experience, entertainment-wise, graphics-wise, and so forth. We do what we can within the constraints of our budget. So we appreciate your support. Anyway, here we go. So let's talk. So late yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard, at a gathering of U.S. military veterans and so forth with President Trump, said this.
We cannot be prosperous unless we are at peace. And we can't live free as long as we have a government that is retaliating against its political opponents and undermining our civil liberties, weaponizing our very institutions against those they deem as a threat. Kamala Harris has done this over the last 3.5 years. She won't hesitate to continue that if she is elected as president. President Trump has been their first and foremost target in this because they don't want us as voters to even have the option to vote for him. I've been their most recent target, added to a secret domestic terror watch list after exposing the truth about what kind of dangers we would face if Kamala Harris is elected as president. We as Americans must stand together to reject this anti-freedom culture of political retaliation and abuse of power. We can't allow our country to be destroyed by politicians who will put their own power ahead of the interests of the American people, our freedom, and our future. I am proud to stand here before you today, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. If you love our country, as I do, if you cherish peace and freedom as we do, I invite you to join me in doing all that we can to save our country and elect President Donald J. Trump and send him back to the White House to do the tough work of saving our country and serving the people. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Well, I think it's a pretty good bet that should Donald Trump win the presidency, he's probably going to give Tulsi Gabbard a pretty important position. Now, Tulsi is no longer a Democrat, but neither is she a Republican. She is officially an independent and may well remain such. It's hard to know. But, there are many people who are independents who are not registered. I think I'm registered Republican at the moment, but I've been an independent over the years, and it doesn't seem like that big a deal to me. But she is now the second prominent Democrat or recently minted ex-Democrat who's joined the Trump train, come out in support. And it appears, this seems to be a healthy thing, although you can only go so far with big tent politics. At a certain point, you have to stand on principle and decide what it is you believe and don't believe in. And from our point of view, of course, we are very solicitous of the failure of government to stay within its constitutional bounds, or perhaps more aptly put, the failure of us, the American citizens, to make sure that our elected representatives of any party keep government within its constitutional bounds. And from this original sin, so to speak, many of the other ills stem. The budget crisis that we have, the debt crisis that we have, and many other things, one of which, of course, Tulsi mentioned that she's concerned about, namely this regime of suffocating censorship and political persecution, which are also side effects of this federal leviathan that we've allowed both parties to create over the last several generations. Well, with me in the studio is the indefatigable Gary Benoit, the editor-in-chief of the New American Magazine, and off this show, he's my boss. I genuflect and bow. Not genuflect, that's a Catholic term. I probably shouldn't say that. But I bow before him, and I respect his authority. Paul Dragoo has the flu. He was supposed to be here today, so we're doing this in short notice. Just so you know, Paul will be back, and from tomorrow for the next week, I will be vacationing in South America. So anyway, they're going to be a few change-ups, but we're going to keep the show going. Gary.
Yes.
What do you think about the latest development with Tulsi Gabbard? Do you like Tulsi? Do you think she's an ally overall of the grand old cause?
Well, I think like so many others, she probably has been red-pilled, at least to a degree, but I did take a look at the Freedom Index, and for our viewers who may not be familiar with that the Freedom Index is a congressional scorecard published by the New American Magazine. We look at the votes of every single senator, every single representative in Congress, and rate those votes on the basis of the U.S. Constitution. Now, of course, Gabbard is not now in Congress, but she was in Congress for a number of years, and her cumulative score is 29%, which means that her fidelity toward the Constitution is not very good. However, she is not a warmonger, and she is somebody who believes in civil liberties. And based on what she said in the clip that you just showed, Steve, she is also somebody who recognizes that the survival of America is at stake, because she talked about saving America. And so the fact that people like Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and others are coming together for the purpose of saving America, I say more power to them. Because if we don't save America, if we lose the Constitution, if we lose our civil liberties, if we lose our freedoms, then everything is down the drain.
Well,
however, if we can save the Constitution, then later on we can fight on those issues in which we disagree.
Okay, well, that's one scenario, and it may well be. I mean, my heart wants to accept that version, but let me play the devil's advocate for a moment. So we are purists about, as you alluded to, and I did as well, in regards to the Constitution, in regards to limited government writ large, and it's very clear that Trump is not on board 100%. You know, one of the things that Trump has been somewhat inconsistent with, for example, is Americans' involvement in these sovereignty-compromising international multilateral agreements. Military agreements like NATO, trade agreements like NAFTA, now the U.S., what's it called? The
MCA.
The USMCA, and so forth, which is essentially the same thing. There are a few changes. And Trump has been, a little bit, he's kind of been a tergiversator as far as those are concerned. And there have been some other issues as well. So he's not 100%. He's not like Ron Paul or somebody or somebody like that. So my concern, but I think we would agree that his instincts and certainly the broader sentiment of the MAGA movement, more often than not, significantly more often than not, tends to weigh down on the side of less government, more responsibility, and all that kind of thing. And certainly the Constitution. Trump talks about the Constitution a lot. He's clearly on a learning curve. He used to be a Democrat himself, lest we forget, some time ago, but he was. Okay. But my question is this. Is there a possibility that the MAGA movement could end up being diluted, in a sense, by influence of people who are significantly to the left of Trump on a number of issues? In other words, in the interest of creating a bigger tent and professing to represent all of America, which is, all of which is noble sounding and may be noble indeed, but could it not have the unintended side effect of creating a movement that's ultimately just kind of this popular mass entertainment venue that tries to be all things to all people and ends up sacrificing on the altar some of the more important principles of constitutionalism and Americanism that Trump has been faithful to?
I think that's a very real concern, Steve. But let me say this. If Robert F. Kennedy Jr. were still running for president and on the ballot here in Wisconsin, I would not vote for him because of issues that he takes that I disagree with, very much including the issue of abortion. I would not vote for anybody who is a supporter of so-called choice with regard to the killing of innocent human life. Same thing with Gabbard. I would not vote for her. So there are some very real problems. But let's look at what else Trump has done. And obviously his record is a very mixed bag. But if you look at J.D. Vance, for example, he selected Vance as his running mate. And Vance's record in the Senate is respectable. It's better than most Republicans, and of course better than the Democrats. And I also would say that at the end of Trump's first term, we did a special report. We did a bookazine, so to speak, with regard to Trump World. And we put Trump's record under a microscope. And he did some things that we very strongly agree with, and he did some things that we disagree with. But in either case, we let the chips fall where they may. So Trump is imperfect. But I do believe he is an enemy of the deep state, and that the deep state is doing everything it can to stop him from getting back into the presidency again.
Yeah, and that seems to be perhaps the key right here, is that people are realizing that we are morphing into an oligarchic autocracy.
Right.
We call it the deep state, but that's really what it is, okay? And so as a result, a whole slew of people who would normally be liberal, like, for example, Brett Weinstein, who's very much a liberal and a Democrat and so forth.
He supported Trump too.
Are now coming on board and saying, well, there are things obviously they find distasteful about Trump or whatever, but they're recognizing that perhaps the overarching priority right now is to cripple the deep state, is to because if not, we're going to be living in a police state in a couple more electoral cycles. That's how acute the problem is. And so the hope is, and I certainly share that hope, that this big tent approach will unite enough people to disenfranchise the deep state as far as is possible, to send them scurrying back into their gutters and holes, and so that we can get back to disagreeing about the things that we used to disagree on, but still with the sense that overall it's our country and the Republic and the Constitution will endure. We'll certainly see. Well, we've got another story that I want to cover before we finish this segment. We don't usually try to cram more than one story into a segment, but we've got so much today that we decided to err on the side of quantity, perhaps. Hopefully quality won't suffer in the way. But we have this letter. I don't know if we have an image from it somewhere, but this letter from Mark Zuckerberg, there it is, who is of course the founder and CEO of Meta, the corporation formerly known as Facebook, and he has written a letter to Jim Jordan, in effect fessing up to what Facebook was alleged to have done a few years ago when the Biden administration and the Biden campaign, actually prior to the election, was doing everything it could to discredit Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Gary, tell us about it.
Well, I'd like to summarize the letter, and I have 3 points here, and actually these points were also made by the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee, which was the recipient of the letter when it was sent to Chairman Jim Jordan of that committee. But here are the 3 points. The first one is that the Biden-Harris administration pressured Facebook to censor Americans. In fact, this letter specifically mentions COVID-19 content, that Facebook was pressured to censor that content. The second point is that Facebook went along with that, at least it largely went along with that. It acknowledged so in the letter that it did censor Americans. And the third point is that Facebook demoted the Hunter Biden laptop story. And of course, that was a story that was broken by the New York Post, and that was dismissed by the powers that be as being Russian disinformation. Of course, it turned out not to be Russian disinformation. It turned out to be true. But Facebook, on that basis, and as a result of pressure from the U.S. government, demoted that laptop story. And there are a couple of sentences in that letter I would like to focus on now. So let me read these 2 specific sentences. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I also think we made some choices that, with the benefit of hindsight and new information, we wouldn't make today. Now, of course, Facebook, and specifically Zuckerberg, is trying to put the best face on its actions. But the bottom line is that here is an acknowledgement on the part of Zuckerberg and Facebook that they did engage in censorship as a result of pressure from the U.S. government. But I would say, Steve, the fact that acknowledgement is even being made now is still a win for free speech.
Yes, well, certainly. And I mean, this is one hopes that Zuckerman's professions of regret are sincere. We'll see. Certainly, again, a lot of people who, maybe once upon a time were full-throated supporters of this have come to realize, oh my goodness, this is in fact censorship, and it can go back to bite me, even though I may think I'm part of the winning team now. Right. That can change. And, again, some of these left of center, intellectuals like Brett Weinstein and others, Matt Taibbi, are coming to this realization, right, and are being red-pilled, or as we like to say in this show sometimes, clear-pilled, right? They're coming to the sense of clarity as to what is actually happening, as opposed to what we're being told right is going on. And this really isn't, at root, a partisan struggle, because the nature of Jacobins, including communists and other types of leftist radicals, is once they get into power, the first thing they do is they devour their own. There's a reason that Joseph Stalin famously referred to intellectuals, what we would call now liberal intellectual elite types, as useful idiots, because they're the first ones to get sent to the gulags once, the hard-headed realists with the guns come to power. All right? And I think some people, at least certain people with a broader sense, of history and how that works, are starting to realize, right now, nobody censors me on Facebook and so forth. Right now, I don't have G-men coming to my door to ask why I posted that questionable meme. but it will happen eventually to me. Now, a lot of people still aren't there yet, on the left, but it's happening. So hopefully,
right. It is happening. But I would like to put this story in perhaps a different light, because as I said earlier, Facebook is putting a pretty face on it. But consider how many people died as a result of COVID policies. Consider how many lives were destroyed, how many businesses were destroyed. All the harm that was done as a result of those policies.
Well, and consider the catastrophe
how different that might have been if this story was not censored by Zuckerberg and others. It's a very serious thing.
But consider the damage inflicted not only on the U.S. body politic, but on the entire world by the Biden administration, which it could be argued might have not been elected had the Hunter laptop story not also been suppressed by Facebook.
Which is why we need a free press, not a controlled press.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, speaking of free press, do you enjoy the free speech that Rumble is protecting and fighting for? Our show on Rumble is only possible thanks to our viewers supporting Rumble's platform by purchasing Rumble's products. Most of you drink coffee every day. That's why you have to try Rumble's $17.75 coffee, and it's the same price as the coffee you buy now, but it's way better. Rumble's $17.75 coffee is free from chemicals, yet rich in flavor. This is because their beans are sourced from high-altitude farms in Bolivia, hand-picked, roasted weekly at their facility in Miami, and delivered fresh to your doorstep. And as believers in freedom, buying from Rumble helps fight back against woke corporations like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. Join the coffee revolution and brew rebellion with Rumble's $17.75 coffee. Go to 1775coffee.com, use code STUDIO, and get a free month's supply of their cognitive boosting supplement Limitless when you buy 2 bags of their coffee. Think about that. It's a crazy deal, and the supplement is worth more than the 2 bags of coffee. Go to 1775coffee.com and try their amazing coffee. We will be right back.
Socialism has a much stronger grip on America than I think the majority of Americans realize. I mean, all this stuff about utopia doesn't exist.
Are you ready to take a stand? Join us in beautiful Laguna Hills, California on September 20th and 21st for an inspiring 2-day event with General Flynn. This powerful event will also feature keynote speaker Pastor Paul Blair, along with a variety of important topics that you won't want to miss.
If Americans want to remain a free and sovereign nation, more people need to understand the principles and values that built this great nation. At the John Birch Society, we have the organization, the plan, and the resources to do just that. Our founder, Robert Welch, said, "Education is our total strategy and truth our only weapon." Go to jbs.org to learn more, including how you can get involved to work locally and impact nationally. Join the John Birch Society today.
So yesterday, a district judge down in Texas issued a ruling in effect staying the new Biden administration policy, which would provide an easy route for illegal spouses living in the United States, illegal immigrant spouses, to have a path to citizenship that would not, in defiance of precedent, require them first to leave the country, go back to their native country, their place of citizenship, and restart the application process there. This was a policy that the Biden administration announced barely a month ago, and now in response to a lawsuit by 16 different states, specifically the attorneys general of 16 different states, including the state of Texas, a district judge down in Texas has put a stay on this. The reason Texas is important is that Texas is part of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the most conservative of the 13 circuit courts in the United States. It's a preferred venue for people appealing who put cases like this out for review and for appeal, because the chances are good that this decision will be upheld. Of course, it will be appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court and then perhaps even to the Supreme Court. But this is a very significant event that's occurred. It's attracting a lot of buzz. Once again, the state of Texas, led by its indefatigable Attorney General Ken Paxton, whom we hope to interview someday on this show, but we'll see if that comes to pass, is sticking a thumb in the eye of the Biden administration. Let's look at a little news broadcast, kind of summarize what's happening.
A lawsuit claims that immigrants living without legal status are costing the state of Texas millions of dollars in sectors like healthcare and law enforcement. The court order will last for 2 weeks, but that could be extended. This just 1 week after the Department of Homeland Security began accepting new applications for citizenship through this policy.
Yes, well, by all estimations, this policy would lead to the fast-track citizenship of up to more than 500,000 people, 500,000 illegals. 500,000 illegal spouses and perhaps up to 50,000 children would qualify under this policy. So this is yet another way that the Biden administration has been working to, in effect, legitimize their lawless immigration policy of the last several years. They've brought them in. Now they want to keep them. Now, technically, this would only apply to people who've already lived here for 10 years. So before you mention this in the comments, yes, I'm aware of the fact that it wouldn't apply to people who have come in the last several years. But of course, it would be a release valve, in effect, that would allow them to put the imprimatur of legality on people who've been living here literally for a decade or more. Okay, who've been married. I guess the deadline was they had to get married by June 17th to an American citizen in order for this to kick in. And also they need to have a clean criminal record and all this kind of thing. But still, all in all, it would be in effect a massive amnesty and would further incentivize the ongoing tide of illegal immigration that we're already grappling with. And of course, create legal conditions by which the existing pool of more than 10 million, estimated 10 million illegals that come under Biden can say, see, you need to do the same thing for us. If what's fair for them is fair for us. It's all about precedent in law. And so this would create a devastating precedent and make any efforts by a future Trump administration or any other sympathetic administration that might try to renew Trump's agenda of putting a halt to illegal immigration, it might make it very difficult for them to do that. Because, one of the ways that the deep state operates is they create massive legal entanglements. They tie things up in the court. They create a web of precedents that judges, by their very nature, because of a legal principle called stare decisis, meaning let stand the decision unless there are really, really compelling reasons to do otherwise. Judges tend to be naturally conservative in that way. And so once the precedent is established, it becomes very, very difficult to change. So now we have this attempt to create an entirely new legal landscape for certain classes of illegal immigrants. And, it's a very concerning thing. What do you think about all this, Gary?
Well, I just want to add to what you said, Steve, that precedents have already been established in the past, and this might shock or maybe even get a few of our viewers upset. But let's go back to the administrations of Ronald Reagan. He was president in the 1980s. He's considered the most conservative of the modern presidents. But under the Reagan administration, we had an amnesty. And that was supposed to solve the problem at that time. But since then, we've had other amnesties. Of course, the problem is much, much worse today than it was during the time of the Reagan administration. So it's just amnesty after amnesty. And this is a step-by-step process. And I want to point out, too, that hard cases make bad law. Because I'm sure there's some hardship cases here of people who would be deported. But the problem wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't what we've done in the past. So let's get back to obeying the law.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's continue. We have another major story from yesterday afternoon before we close this segment out. Dan Bongino goes beast mode before a congressional committee. Bongino, of course, is now something of an internet celebrity. He's here on Rumble. Of course, he has a big Rumble channel, a big following. He's a former Secret Service agent with literally decades of experience. He was in the Secret Service, I believe, with under President Clinton, and then under George W. Bush, and then under Barack Obama. And he's a Trump supporter and a very articulate fellow. And yesterday, he was one of the featured testifiers, witnesses at a panel, kind of following up on what's going on with the Secret Service snafu back in Butler, Pennsylvania. You know what we're talking about. Let's roll the first clip.
It appears that for the first time in American history, we have a Secret Service that is making decisions that may not be all political, but may have a political tinge to them. So what you're saying, I would love to say, Congressman, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But I tell you with a pure heart, and I'm being absolutely candid, I have no skin in this game. I don't work there anymore. I am not their PR guy. I run my own business. I absolutely believe Donald Trump and an enhanced security posture he should have had would have made him look more presidential, would have facilitated the logistical operation of him traveling. I think they were concerned about optics and making him look like a big shot or whatever, word you want to throw out there. And they were making some of these decisions based purely on grade school level politics.
I don't want to believe that, but I didn't want to believe it with the FBI either. I didn't want to believe it with the NIH either. I mean, a lot of these agencies that have been, I think, subject to political capture, we want to think of them as above that. And we all spend time around Secret Service. We're inspired by their patriotism and the willingness you have to literally take a bullet for someone if necessary. But just like in the military, just like at the FBI, I worry about the political capture happening at headquarters, and then that culture informing decisions in a way that's very damaging to the country. So what Mr. Bongino just said ought to be the most important work of the United States Congress, to figure out if these decisions were run-of-the-mill incompetence that you've got to deal with the better tech and the better processes and the better HR and getting rid of the DEI. But if it's something even darker and more devious than that, that must be rooted out, because what we've seen at these other agencies of government is it does not cure itself. It has to be excised, and that investigation is the most important work we can do. I thank you guys for leading this effort, and I yield back.
Great. Yeah, well, Gary, I mean, we're getting more and more testimony and video coming in from that day, that fateful afternoon in Butler, Pennsylvania, the apparent utter incompetence, the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing on the scene, continued talk about possibly another shooter, and then, the thing that's really curiouser from my point of view is what's happened to Thomas Crooks and his family. They have vanished into the memory hole. So Thomas Crooks himself, his body was cremated very quickly after the event, which is a little bit strange. You would think that there would be, something about that. His father, it turns out, has just retained the services of the most prominent law firm in Pittsburgh. We wonders why. Very, very strange. So, and then there are other questions. For example, in his car, they found IEDs,
which we did not know.
Improvised explosive devices and stuff like this. And this, we're told, was all came from the mind of this kind of odd 20-year-old man who showed no evidence and no real prior history of radicalism, much less of any kind of tactical savoir-faire that would have enabled him to achieve what he did, which was, just was quite an extraordinary thing. In a negative way, but the fact that he was able to supposedly elude all of the measures of the Secret Service and the Pennsylvania State Police that were put up in the area, get on a roof, get off all those shots with a gun, and, bring all kinds of other, questionable items into the area, fly a drone over it the day before, conduct surveillance, is just extraordinary. Just extraordinary. Now, it may well be that it's ultimately all a story about signal government incompetence. Secret Service, after all, is a government agency. And we know how competence is systematically and haphazardly disincentivized in any government system. Okay, including the military, including the things that you would hope would be the most competent. It's just an inevitable side effect of the way government works. But that said, there's so much that we don't want to go too far here and fan the flames of excessive speculation. But it is passing strange that Thomas Crooks is a non-entity now. And his family and all that's completely forgotten. There are no reporters, apparently, that we're aware of, doing any investigation, snooping around, trying to figure out. You would think, with how momentous that event was, that they would be focused like bloodhounds, and yet nothing.
Right. Well, as you pointed out, Steve, we do not want to get ahead of the evidence. But at the same time, there is certain evidence that we're already aware of, and evidence continues to come out. And it seems like as evidence comes out, that the scenario that it was incompetence on the part of the government, period, is looking less likely. And the scenario that there may be more involved is looking more likely. And I'd like to go back to the Kennedy assassination. And, of course, we're talking about John F. Kennedy, the uncle of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the evidence there, although some evidence is still hidden by the U.S. government, but nonetheless, there is evidence indicating, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. believes this, and he said this publicly, that the CIA was involved or complicit with that assassination. So the deep state has in the past, if you believe that is the case, has in the past assassinated an American president. And considering how much the deep state hates Donald Trump, would they go after Donald Trump the same way if they can't stop him any other way? That, I believe, Steve, is a reasonable question.
Yeah, it's a reasonable question. Of course, people are scrambling to answer. It could happen again, either on the hustings somewhere this fall, or perhaps should Trump be elected president. Of course, once he's president, he has his own kind of insurance policy, because if there's one person the deep state hates and fears even more than Trump, it's J.D. Vance.
Yes.
And so if he does get elected, I would think they would probably say, well, let's cut our losses and hope we can traduce and destroy J.D. Vance's name and prevent him from getting elected president 4 years from now, and make sure that this Trump thing is a passing aberration. But we'll see what happens. We really will. It's an interesting story. We will stay abreast of it. As I say, we like to clear pill people, so that's why we don't want to indulge in irresponsible speculation here. But at the same time, we don't want you to forget this and many other stories, because one of the main weapons of the successful, savvy propagandist is not making you think about something in a different way, but making you forget something important, making you decide that this thing or that has happened should be deprioritized, nothing to see here, let's move on to the next shiny object. And that seems to be, for whatever reason, is happening with regard to the momentous events in Butler, Pennsylvania, only a few weeks ago.
Sounds like you're describing our Orwellian memory hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, we still have much to cover, so we will take a quick break and we'll be right back.
In 1988, the John Birch Society produced a documentary so predictive, it's as though they had a time machine. Out of Control, Immigration Invasion was produced and hosted by investigative reporter William F. Jasper, and looks at the growing problem of unrestricted illegal immigration that, in 1988, already saw upwards of 10 to 20 million illegal aliens within the borders of the U.S. Unknown agents from around the world using the southern border as easy entry. Certainly, some are innocent families escaping hardship, but also certainly some are criminals, potentially terrorists. Is it not appropriate that there be some criteria for the entry of any sovereign nation? Why should the U.S. be different than Canada, Germany, Russia, Japan, or every other country on the planet? Out of Control, Immigration Invasion. Watch this time capsule of prescient wisdom at thenewamerican.com/outofcontrol.
Hello. We're back. And so we've got one more major story to cover for you. And then we're going to have a special guest on our show for the fourth segment. But yesterday, the zombie prosecutor himself, who refuses to die, Jack Smith, came back and tried to bite Trump yet again. This time, Jack Smith is contesting last month's ruling by Florida District Court Judge Eileen Cannon, who in effect threw out the entire spurious Mar-a-Lago documents case. Now, there are many possible grounds for this, and we and many others have been saying for literally months that this case should have been dismissed with prejudice long ago. In my opinion, it took Judge Cannon overlong to get to that point, but she finally did, and what she did was, in effect, she dismissed the case and said the reason is that the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, has no constitutional authority, that he was appointed, in effect, without any color of constitutional justice. Now, she alluded to something, they alluded to something called the Appointments Clause, which I want to read to you first so you understand what's going on here. So there is a clause in the Constitution that says thus: ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States be appointed by the President subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. although Congress may vest the appointment of inferior officers in the president alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. In other words, Congress does have the authority to vest in the president the power to make appointments, and by extension, the executive branch, to make appointments without going through the advice and consent of the Senate thing that's described here, which is normally the case. They can make exceptions, but they have to do it legislatively. Now, for a long time, there was a piece of legislation, the special counsel law, that in effect was Congress saying, we authorize the appointment of these special counsels from case to case. Okay, so the last such special counsel who was appointed under that law was the special counsel who went after Bill Clinton way back in the 1990s, who resigned one day before the law expired because he felt that he would no longer be legitimate, not be constitutionally legitimate. But now, and this is what Eileen Cannon observed in her scathing decision a month ago, now we have reached such a point where we've decided that we can just bypass the need for any legislation. So there is currently no legislation as such that explicitly authorizes the president or the head of the Department of Justice to create a special counsel to investigate things like what Jack Smith has been doing. Okay, so what Cannon said in her ruling, she says, upon careful study of the foundational challenges raised in the motion, the court is convinced that special counsel Smith's prosecution of this action breaches two structural cornerstones of our constitutional scheme: the role of Congress in the appointment of constitutional officers and the role of Congress in authorizing expenditures by law. The framers, she goes on, gave Congress a pivotal role in the appointment of principal and inferior officers. That role cannot be usurped by the executive branch or diffused elsewhere, whether in this case or in another case, whether in times of heightened national need or not. In the case of inferior officers, that means that Congress is empowered to decide if it wishes to vest appointment power in a head of department, and indeed Congress has proven itself quite capable of doing so in many other statutory contexts. But it plainly did not do so here, despite the special counsel's strained statutory readings. What does this mean? Well, to kind of decipher the legalese a little bit, she says, Congress, on many occasions, has passed statutes authorizing this kind of appointment that, in effect, skirts the constitutional requirement for advice and consent, for review by the Senate, for confirmation by the Senate. Okay, which is, of course, robustly in place in the case of ambassadors and department heads and federal judges and obviously Supreme Court justices, this kind of thing. Okay, but Congress can make these exceptions, but what she's saying is it has to be explicit. There has to be a statute. There has to be a law passed by Congress that says you can do this in the case of this office, and here's how it has to be done. But this, at the end of the 90s, this was essentially jettisoned, and now the practice is simply to appoint special counsels willy-nilly and unleash them and let them run amok and do whatever they want. And this is, of course, precisely what Jack Smith has done. He has just been an attack dog, running wild, and he's doing it yet again. So on Monday, yesterday, he filed this appeal as he promised he would, essentially adjoining the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to overturn Cannon's ruling. Now, it has overturned her some of the other stuff that she's done. So it's not at all, it depends on which judges are actually involved that actually preside over the appeal as to how this is going to end up. But there is a chance that the zombie prosecution of the utterly ridiculous Mar-a-Lago classified documents case could come back to life to bite President Trump and indeed many of his co-defendants in that case. So Smith said, for example, and very presumptuously, I would say, he says, the district court's contrary conclusion depended solely on its erroneous determination that no other law supported the special counsel's appointment. Because its premise was wrong, so was its conclusion. So as usual, full of bluster and high-sounding legalese, but ultimately, this is what Jack Smith does. He blusters, he tries to intimidate, and right now he's trying to bluster and intimidate the justices down in Florida to see things his way so he can resume his one-man crusade against Donald Trump using the fully weaponized Biden Department of Justice legal system. Gary, what can you add to that?
You referred to Jack Smith as being a zombie prosecutor.
Well, I could also call him. I could also call him, Lord Dooku, because he does resemble Lord Dooku and also Saruman,
zombie
the late Christopher Lee. But we're not going to go there because we don't like to make fun of people.
But you also refer to him as an attack dog. So here's my question,
metaphor.
and you could treat this question as rhetorical if you like. But is this zombie prosecutor? Is this attack dog? Is he going to be able to take a bite out of Trump going after blood, or will he be biting off more than he can chew?
Well, that's good that you would ask that. For those of you who are fans of zombie movies like me, I mean, if you've watched Resident Evil and other such entries on the zombie movie palette, you know that the zombie dog is in fact a fairly common horror movie trope. Where the good guys are investigating the ruined lab where the zombie virus was unleashed, and instead of finding people shuffling, they find, zombified Dobermans running around or something
really
like that.
So he's metaphors, then.
We're not really mixing metaphors if you're a horror movie maven, which I confess I sort of am. But yeah, so he's kind of like one of those, He's an attack dog and a zombie rolled into one. And frankly, to mix metaphors again, I don't know when they're going to be able to stake him in the heart.
Okay.
But we'll see. Hopefully this nonsense will end if Trump gets elected president. It remains to be seen. But as of now, the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case is a thing again, and so is lawfare writ large. Don't forget this, people. Okay? Just because the polls are saying this, just because the Trump train seems to be unstoppable, doesn't mean that the deep state and its lawfare are going to give up. Jack Smith is not going to give up. Judge Merchan is not going to give up. The whole rest of that sorry, sordid crew of legal goblins is not going to give up and just let bygones be bygones. And in the end, probably the only relief that Trump will enjoy will be a presidential pardon, possibly by himself to himself. But we shall see. Stay tuned. Well, coming up, we're going to have John Schrock with us from the John Birch Society.
Imprisonment, forced labor, permanent separation from my family, perhaps death. I knew what could happen to people who were caught trying to defect, but the watchtowers stood yards away. The possibility of a new life in a different world, one without tyranny, was within sight. The West. I thought of the rewards no longer crushed under the boot of communism. I would work and make money, no longer restrained by the chains of collectivism. I would say what I wanted, without fear of spies and informants nearby. I would be free. The frozen rain and Romanian mud seeped through my gloves and cloths. I fantasized about the fire burning in the wood stove of my parents' home, but I pushed those thoughts from my mind, closed my eyes, and waited for the cover of the darkness.
Get Defector, a true story of tyranny, liberty, and purpose by Mark Hobafkovich with Paul Dragu, a thrilling page-turner that will remind you how precious yet vulnerable freedom is. Available at shopjbs.org or Amazon. For a limited time, get 20% off your entire order using promo code Defector20 when you purchase Defector at shopjbs.org.
Self-reliance was a cornerstone used by our founders to build this great nation. It's important for us to stay independent of the woke structures in today's world.
Get a copy of our latest collector's edition, Self-Reliance. Learn about the necessity of self-reliance for a free people and basic tips on how to get there. Never give up hope.
Okay, here we are in the final segment. Rumble's exclusive apparel has finally arrived. They are now offering 20% off of all purchases in the Rumble store with the discount code DROP20. If you want to support the brand that is fighting for free speech and fighting for our First Amendment, this is the best way to do it. They have tees, sweaters, hats, plus much more. Go to Rumble store and make sure to enter DROP20, that's DROP20, as the promo code to get 20% off your entire order. Boy, I love Rumble. I mean, I really love Rumble. And I'm really mightily enthused by the fact that Rumble's CEO, Chris Pavlovski, is actually standing up for free speech, not just here in the United States, but overseas as well. Rumble is currently being persecuted by the French government and so forth and so on. We talked about this, I believe, in the show yesterday. And so I'm proud and happy to advocate for Rumble. I'm very grateful that they kind of allow us to run our show, that we can do it without interference. And joining me in the studio now is John Schrock, the National Field Director of the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society, you will recall, is our parent organization. It has been around for decades, absolutely decades. The New American is the official kind of the magazine published by the John Birch Society, kind of reflects our point of view. If you want to know what so-called Birchers think, well, read the New American. In fact, subscribe to the New American if you really want to know what makes us tick, okay? But John is here to talk to us a little bit. As the field director, he kind of has the big picture of our operations nationwide. John, what do you want to talk to us about today?
Well, Steve, thanks for having me on today. It's been exciting. You mentioned the attacks on Rumble. I'm sure you guys talked about it yesterday. Telegram's getting attacked. They've got the president or CEO of Telegram that's been attacked. They've got him in
covered it. Yeah.
Custody. Mm-hmm. Well, there's also wins that are happening out in America. We've got problems in Iowa. They're trying to put in carbon capture pipelines, but we are slowly seeing people becoming aware of what the problem is. And I've been excited about how they're going about and doing it. They're organizing. They are getting neighbors involved. They're talking to their neighbors. And this is what they don't want to have happen. They being the deep state, they don't want people talking amongst each other. And they are talking. They are getting in front of their elected officials. They are testifying at county levels, at city levels, at state levels, in order to be able to educate their legislators so that they can make the proper laws. And that's what we do at the Birch Society, is train people to become involved. And we are seeing massive success in that. So it's exciting to know that. We often focus on the fact of, this is a problem, but we also can be able to see the success. In Indiana, we were able to see a Article 5 bill, a constitutional convention bill, stopped by Birchers that went and testified at the Senate Judiciary Committee. They also stepped up in order to save our children. One of our action plans that we have at the Society, there was a anti-parental rights bill, and our members went and educated the legislators, and they were able to stop that bill. And so we're excited what's happening. You mentioned, subscribing to the New American. I love that depopulation magazine that we just had a couple of what is that now? A couple months ago, or it seems time flies by. What a great opportunity for people to become educated on all of these important topics.
Well, I mean, as we like to say as part of our intro to the show, we come to you from flyover country, and there's a reason for that. We're not based in New York City or Atlanta or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or some other, or Chicago, which is actually not too far from here, several hours drive, but still, we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere in a lovely little community called Appleton, Wisconsin, not far from Green Bay. And we've been here for decades because our business is not, if people refer to us as a lobbying organization, no, that's not what we do. Right. I mean, maybe only in the broadest sense of the word, in that we lobby American citizens to educate themselves and to become activists. That's what we do. And the purpose of the show, of course, is primarily educating. So, if you want someone to simply report on what's happening in the world, all the bells and whistles, the latest burning tank photos from the Middle East or whatever. Well, there are an infinite number of news organizations, bona fide news organizations that do that. We don't have any reporters in the field, any stringers out there, reporting from wherever, And we, of course, are very selective in the stories that we cover because our mission is to give people the vital truths and information behind the news, and that what we call the clear pill perspective that enables them that empowers them so that they're not made, captured by, for example, partisanship, which is the tribal pull of political parties is very strong. People get very emotionally involved in these things. And so it's important that people understand that the business at hand is preserving our republic, our freedoms, and our Constitution. It's not about ensuring the ascendancy of one political tribe against another. or even perhaps of supporting certain feel-good issues that people think will be the solution, like federal term limits, for example. But then, in fact, if you look at them, or Constitutional Convention, you mentioned Article 5 Convention, there are quite a few conservative people otherwise of good intentions, who are kind of supporting an Article 5 Convention or something similar to that without fully apprehending the potential dangers that it poses. So, we would like to get along with everybody and have lots and lots of friends on our side and be part of a big tribe and all this. That's a natural human thing.
Yes.
But we need people to understand clearly what the truths are, where things stand. We like Donald Trump quite a bit, but as we've mentioned already in today's show and many other times, there are areas where we diverge and we say, well, that's not what we should be doing. It may be popular with MAGA, but it's not the right thing for our republic. So we have a once a year event. We have one this year out in California.
Laguna
Our
Hills,
Leadership
California.
Council, used to be called Council Dinner. Tell us about it.
The Leadership Conference is going to be in Laguna Hills, California, September 20 and 21 this year. We have the wonderful opportunity to be able to have William Jasper come and speak to us. He's going to be on Saturday morning speaking to us there. And then Saturday evening, we have Pastor Paul Blair from Oklahoma, as well as General Michael Flynn will be speaking as well. I would highly recommend people be able to get tickets. It doesn't matter where in the United States you say, well, California's not near me. Fly into John Wayne Airport. What a wonderful opportunity to get out there, to be educated. How can you become involved in your community? We're going to talk about what the problem is. We're going to talk about what the solution is, and then give the tools of what you can do to become involved. You talk about, I've heard the term that we're lobbyists. We're a lobbyist organization. Well, we're training citizen lobbyists so that they are the ones, as you said so eloquently, that they are the ones that are involved. We cut through the noise. I know right now that there's a lot of talk, what happened with RFK and his exposing how people are poisoning food. We've got files just to the left of me. The front of you is our archives, and we have reams of information about that. We've been talking about these truths. We've been cutting through that noise for years. People need to learn to believe us now. We have so much information for them, but it's not just information that we offer. We also offer an action plan, how they can meaningfully become involved. That's what we do, and that's what we're going to be training at the Leadership Conference, September 20 and 21, Laguna Hills, California.
Yes, and that is actually in Orange County, which is a small kind of an island of sanity out there on the left coast. If you've never been to California, may I suggest that you go attend the event, and then go just drive around the streets and look at all the homeless people and all of the fruits of the in that blighted state that have been wrought by socialism. Yes. It's one thing to see it on the news; it's another thing to experience it firsthand. Well, I don't know, John. I guess I experience a certain amount of satisfaction in seeing that all the things that we've been talking about for a long time, that were so long dismissed as being conspiracy theories, as being the vaporings of addle-pated madmen on the far right who don't know what they're talking about, paranoid, delusional, all this stuff is now becoming mainstream in politics to the extent that even some of the liberal commentariat have admitted that the Birch Society, we're all Birchers now in a sense. If you look at much of the texture of the MAGA agenda and other things, it's very skeptical about the Federal Reserve, very skeptical about the United Nations, goes on and on. Obviously, you mentioned the issue with medicines and COVID was all the stuff that happened with COVID was exactly the kind of abuse that we've been warning about for decades, that for so long was just dismissed and poo-pooed. And now people are being just red-pilled and clear-pilled by the millions, I have to say.
Yes.
To the extent that that they're catching up to us. I hate to sound presumptuous and maybe even a little arrogant, but after so many decades of being considered fringe, we now see people in masse coming around to our point of view, and much to the consternation, by the way, of the liberal elites, who have not changed one iota their perspective. They're the same now as they were 50 years ago. But what they're seeing is that their once broad support of a delusional populace has just been yanked away, and they're becoming increasingly isolated.
I agree. And that's, we can go through.
This is the power of education, right?
Power of education. We can go through all of the things, and it comes back to, have we educated the people? We are actively doing that across the country, and we are seeing victories across the land.
Yes. By victories, we mean we're slowing it down. We're still, unfortunately, heading toward the cliff, and we have a lot of work to do. Is that not so?
Absolutely, Joe.
I mean, so even, and here's one more thing, and then we're running over time, so we're going to sign off after this, but suffice it to say that there is a tendency among many people to say, well, once we get X in the White House, then I can relax. Okay, so there's a very good chance that when it's all said and done, when the dust is settled, that President Trump will become president next year. And perhaps with him, a commanding majority of Republicans in the House and Senate. And you know what? That is precisely the time when you should be most vigilant.
Yes.
That is the beginning. That is not the time to throttle back and say, okay, now I can relax and let somebody else take care of this country's problems. That is the time to say, having seen the preliminary fruits of my efforts and the efforts of millions of other people, of this educational and kind of lobbying enterprise, if you want to call it that, is the time to press forward so that we aren't just in defensive mode, slowing that train down as it continues to draw closer and closer to the proverbial cliff, but instead stopping it and reversing course. And that is going to be the task of a generation or two, I have to say.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, okay, well, that's all we have time for today. We really appreciate your viewership, and we will see you back tomorrow at the New American Daily with more truth behind the news.
Socialism has a much stronger grip on America than I think the majority of Americans realize. I mean, all this stuff about utopia